Good morning. Welcome to all joining us here in the Edward J. Prisbilla University Center at Catholic University of America, as well as all of those joining us online for the Emily Swan Perkins Plenary Address. Emily Swan Perkins was an American hymnologist and one of the founders of the Hymn Society of America, which is now known as the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. I am Marilyn Haskell, immediate past president of the Hymn Society. This morning, we thank Deborah Carlton Loftus, a fellow of the Hymn Society and former important person, for sponsoring this event. Thank you. The Reverend Dr. Mikie Roberts is an ordained Moravian pastor who is currently serving as the program executive of Spiritual Life and Faith and Order of the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland, a position he has held since February 2019. Prior to that position, he served in several capacities throughout the Moravian Church across the Eastern Caribbean, including as editor of the first Caribbean Moravian hymnal and Liturgy Book. And this Sunday marks his 29th wedding anniversary. The Reverend Dr. Roberts will speak on the topic, Beyond Statehood, the role of songs in advancing the national identity of Antigua and Barbuda. Please welcome Mikie Roberts.
Good morning to all. Thank you. Well, I welcome you aboard HS Airline. It's flight 100 destined to Antigua. And in charge of the flight today is your captain. And the captain, as captain, I can say to you, we will have an approximate flying time of about 4 hours and 30 minutes. The weather looks great on our way. And so as we prepare for takeoff, let me ask you to pay attention to the screen above you for a very important announcement. Anytime, no. Don't worry, there are always delays at airport these days. hope you enjoy the flight. Permit me to express my profound gratitude to the leadership of the Hymn Society and really and truly let you know just how much I am enjoying this, my very first visit to a Hymn Society conference. I have always wanted to come, but as was mentioned, July 24th happens to be a very important day. And over the years, many of the meetings either ended around that time, and I always have to check in with the Minister of Home Affairs to make sure. And this time around, the minister said, yes, the cabinet has approved and granted your leave. Just make sure you get back in time for the next cabinet meeting. So I do hope to get back in time for that. Rest assured that at this moment, I will forever treasure this opportunity to speak with you and to address you this morning. As Reverend Cynthia Wilson the other day gave kudos to Ruth Duck, I want to use this opportunity to say just how much Robin Lever, while I was a grad student at Westminster, really nurtured and opened my horizons to groups such as yours, and of course the North American Academy of Liturgy. I stand before you today then mindful that our being able to gather together to commemorate this 100th anniversary is due in large part to the faithful commitment of those who came before us, whose investment of themselves, their time, and their treasure testifies their dedication to congregational singing and music making. At the same time, our being here today is indeed acknowledgement of how we today can see ourselves as spiritual inheritors of the faith that was practiced by those who came before us and who in their work and witness were sustained by their conviction in what this society represents as it serves the body of Christ. Having said that, I believe that what is more than certainly able for us to do today is to invite you to reflect with me on the topic that I have chosen, beyond statehood, the role of songs in advancing the national identity of Antigua and Barbuda. My goal today is to share with you a sample of national songs and patriotic hymns that were created between the mid-late 1960s and the early 1980s, and how the creation, dissemination, and now the preservation of these hymns and songs have contributed tremendously in shaping our national identity. It has already been said repeatedly over these past days that singing enables shaping of the Christian faith. In today's address, though, I want for us to see how Christian faith, in turn, can inform singing, and that singing shaping a national identity. These patriotic songs, unlike much of the resources for which we are usually accustomed to within the usual scope of focus for the Hymn Society, were not penned specifically for congregational purposes. And that, for me, makes them intriguing and can inform, I believe, the future work of the Hymn Society as it considers its trajectory for the next 100 years. These samples of songs that I share today represent and demonstrate to us the movement of how the movement of songs can occur where the starting point is beyond the walls of the church. Yet, though penned to serve a civic cause, these patriotic songs were eventually accepted and woven into the liturgy and the hymnic repository of the people of Antigua and Barbuda. Now, though the extent of the corpus of national and patriotic songs is yet to be determined, in 1985, the government of Antigua and Barbuda, through the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth Affairs, and Sports, published a collection of 27 songs in a volume called Songs of Our Land. And I have the soft copy here with me just as a sample. You should probably see it on the screen as well to the next slide. The compilers of the volume offered no preface or introduction, so it is impossible to offer a rationale which supports the selection of the songs in the volume. However, in my informal survey with current ministry officials, it was felt then that it was indeed not necessary to offer such an introduction or a preface because these songs and hymns had already been committed into the National Memory Bank. That project was also seen to be as the first of many projects, and that it was hoped that there will be later volumes of more national songs. I must say to you that I grew up singing many of these songs because they were included in our school's curriculum, and they were regularly sung at civic and religious gatherings, whether these were at the communal or the national level. Given the time allotted to me today, I have chosen to reference only 5, which I offer as a mere sample of our national songs. Why these 5? Because I believe these 5 songs will indeed provide you with a broad enough panorama of the soundscape of our national hymns and songs. Plus, I only have 1 hour. Given that we are on the last day of a most memorable conference, I invite you to not only sing when we get to that point later, but to also do what we were challenged on the opening day to do, which is to listen. And so this morning, the listening exercise would have us tune our ears to the timbre and the frequency of one of Antigua's most celebrated calypsonians in the person of Sir Maclean Emmanuel, whose stage name as a calypsonian is King Short Shirt. He is still alive. You'll see a picture of him. He's still alive. He's now 80 years old. And I invite you now to just take a look and listen to him as he gives us a word of invitation. And so this is King Short Shirt. Please. Well, let me go on while in the interest of time. Don't worry, the flight is still moving. And along the way, we'll always have turbulence. You have already noted, I'm sure, that I am referring to these compositions as both national hymns and national songs, or patriotic hymns and patriotic songs. I do so because in our Caribbean context, there is no difference. I do so because hymns typically belong within the realm of the sacred, in the liturgy context, and songs are normally being sung outside of that context. However, with the eventual movement of these songs into the liturgical space, what would have started out as patriotic or national hymns national songs has now been referred to as national or patriotic hymns. I use this word intentionally, mindful very much that even within the North American context, the word patriot now has other meanings. You would realize, though, that for us in the Caribbean, fluidity is normative. So whether we say patriotic hymns or patriotic songs, national hymns, national songs, labeling is secondary to functionality. And so with these introductory remarks, permit me then to take you through a journey in which we will see how songs shape national identity. And in that journey, I will speak of the context in which these songs were birthed, under the subtopic, From Slaves to Subjects to Shapers of Destiny, in which I offer an overview of the historical context of Antigua and Barbuda, to ensure a deeper appreciation of these songs. Thereafter, we will look at the text of these songs and sing them through as we engage intentionally in hearing and singing the songs of our land. However, I want you to see these hymns as being in conversation with the calypsos of Short Shirt, and later I will offer an explanation for that juxtaposition. In the final part of the address this morning, under the section which I have captioned, Imagination Takes Us Beyond, I will explore how the triangulation of identity, imagination, and singing can form a synthesis which connects us back to ensuring that we leave this centennial conference fully committed to sing the world God imagines. And so from slaves to subjects to shapers of destiny. And if Brian can forget about Short Shirt for now, we will come back to him later. I just want to let you look at the map of the Caribbean so that you have an idea as to where Antigua and Barbuda are located, just in case you may not know the Caribbean archipelago. And so you can see Puerto Rico in the north, all the way moving south. We come across to the Virgin Islands next to Puerto Rico. And then you have Saba, Statia, the smaller islands, and then Antigua and Barbuda. We normally say to ourselves that we are located in the heart of the Caribbean. Barbuda is much smaller. It is indeed just there's only one town, one city. In Antigua, we still measure it as calling it 108 square miles. And on the next slide, you can see a closer representation of how the country itself is laid out on the Google Earth map. My village, Seaview Farm, is sort of dead center in the country. Somewhere around there. And our airport and all of that is located on the northeast. St. John's, the capital, is on the northwest. The south is where the mountainous region are. Oh yeah, thanks. The south is where the mountainous region are. And we are known for having 365 beaches, one for each day of the year. And when there's a leap year, we find another one for you to throw in as extra. The next slide let you see where Barbuda is. And Barbuda sort of became well known because Princess Diana took her 2 boys there when she was trying to escape all that was happening back in the day between she and her husband. And what makes Barbuda quite unique is that whereas Antigua has white sand, Barbuda's sand is pink because of the coral that surrounds the country. Barbuda was, believe it or not, originally settled as a breeding ground for African slaves. So that is what it is known for, historically, that is. So the history of the twin island nation of Antigua and Barbuda is not very different from the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean islands that were held for centuries under the control of the British Empire. I do not wish to rehash this narrative, given that it is a history that is well captured and retold ad infinitum. However, like so many other islands in the archipelago that make up the Caribbean, Antigua and Barbuda shares in a common history in which the lives of the original inhabitants were not only disrupted with the arrival of the Europeans in the late 15th century, but these indigenous peoples were eventually annihilated. And to maintain an economy that was centered around the cultivation of sugarcane, these islands became sites which today witness, in my opinion, the worst atrocity in human history, African slavery. The lands in the Caribbean, and by extension the Americas, became the place where enslaved Africans were forcibly exploited, dehumanized, and commodified as properties with only one goal: satisfying the greed of European settlers who had taken upon themselves the self-deserving role of being civilized colonizers. With the social construct of this sugar plantation, there were clear lines of power. Egalitarianism was non-existent. Instead, The norm was repressive social construct in which the black Africans and their descendants, as chattel, existed for one purpose only, to serve their masters. Consequently, the dismantling of the social order required a complete reconfiguring of every facet of life. The abolition of the slave trade in 1807 and then the eventual proclamation of emancipation of slavery in 1833 by the British Parliament can be seen as watershed moments that resulted in a movement towards the undoing of centuries of oppression. However, the movement towards independence and self-determination of the former British colonies was not a foregone conclusion. It was not until the mid-20th century that the reins of political control and limited autonomy were being given to former colonies of the British Empire. Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago were the first to gain their independence in 1962. This was followed by Guyana and Barbuda in 1966, the Bahamas in 1973. And in terms of the area of the Caribbean identified as the Lesser Antilles, where Antigua is located, or the Eastern Caribbean, Grenada gained its independence in 1974, Dominica in 1978, and finally, Antigua and Barbuda in 1981. However, what was achieved in 1981 was the result of a long and hard-fought battle which had moments of notable achievements along the way. The first major constitutional shift occurred in 1967 when the country was granted an associated state. This meant that Antigua and Barbuda were fully self-governing in all internal affairs, while the United Kingdom retained responsibility for external affairs and defense. It might be said that we had moved from being slaves, but we were now still subjects of the British Empire, while they offered limited privileges to the citizens. Though I was not yet born, the 1967 constitutional landmark witnessed the birth of composing and disseminating national songs. This included the composition of what was eventually recognized as our state anthem and several other songs, all of which embodied the ideals and goals of our country. The songs allowed the masses to begin to re-image being citizens of Antigua and Barbuda, and not only re-imaging, but reformulating our national identity. Full independence was still to be attained 14 years later. However, these songs and the process of national building was bolstered, ensuring that the decades of the 70s would intentionally serve as a time for the reframing and the reimagining of the national identity, and as such, the stripping away of that which the former colonial masters had imprinted on the people's minds. Now there was this effort to ensure that the ideals of the current political discourse would not be shaped just by what was said of our colonizers, but that the national identity was now going to be one which we could indeed participate in. Consequently, there were songs that were taught to us in primary schools as children growing up in the decade of the 70s. These songs were part of the public schools curriculum. Furthermore, they were sung in cultural and religious spaces. The propagation of these national songs was achieved through every means possible, and they eventually became national treasures. Through these songs, we celebrated what had been achieved in the mid-1960s, while at the same time reminding us that the journey towards national independence was still ongoing. The movement away from being subjects of the British crown was moving apace. Noted Caribbean theologian who is also from Antigua, Cartwright Davis, has boldly asserted, and I quote, "Music, to be sure, is the Caribbean voice of God." This is indeed the case, whether the music is reggae or calypso or any of the other major indigenous expressions, even traditional Christian European hymnody and locally crafted Caribbean hymns. And so with the popularity of the national patriotic songs on the rise in the 60s and the 70s, it is not surprising to realize that songs would be the means by which our unprecedented euphoric moment of independence would be captured and expressed. So on the night of October 31st, 1981, as a young boy on the verge of entering my teenage years, I stood among the thousands who had gathered in the Antigua recreation ground to witness history in the making. For as a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda, I was among those fortunate to be alive to witness this moment in time when our independent nation was being born on November 1st, when the Union Jack was lowered and then the flag of Antigua was hoisted in its place. A beautiful flag that stands out wherever you see it. I must admit, though, that it was only in later years that I grew to appreciate and understand the significance of that moment. And so with the passage of time, intervening years have caused me to reflect more profoundly on the implications of political independence on a small island developing state like Antigua and Barbuda. The process of introspection has led me to consider that in the same way my teen years was a period of which identity formation was predominant, that so too the land of my birth was engaged in a similar process. Having received the right to self-governance, central to this was also having a sense of self-awareness, which would undergird the actions taken as the nation was embarking on a course of self-determination. Consequently, there was the need to reframe the national psyche of the citizens of this newly formed nation, so that the self-perception would govern not only how the masses saw themselves, but also how they were perceived regionally and indeed globally. The reshaping then of our national identity was a matter of great urgency, bearing in mind our nation's history, a history that witnessed the annihilation of the indigenous population, a history in which we would have experienced the settlement of the British colonizers, the development of the sugar plantation system, the Christianizing of enslaved Africans through missionary enterprises, mainly by the Moravians and the Methodists. Woven into the history of our work was also the labor movement with the establishment of trade unions. And these trade unions worked on behalf of the working class to raise the level of standard in the early 20th century. The most prominent labor leader at the time was Vere Cornwall Bird, who assumed political leadership and also became not only the first premier, but also the first prime minister in 1981. Vere Cornwall Bird, as our new prime minister, stood in front of the nation on the night of October 31st and spoke words that even to this day still reverberate down the corridors of time. Take a listen to some of these words, as I've drawn excerpts of his independence speech that he delivered that night. He began by saying, "My people, this night ends 3 centuries of struggle for freedom. This night fulfills our unflagging hopes and satisfies our passionate desire to be free. This night marks the finest hour in our people's history, for at last we are charters of our own course, captains of our own ship, masters of our destiny." And I remember the crowd going, "Yay!" He continued, "My people, we are a multiracial society. Our forefathers were Africans, English, Welsh, Scot, Portuguese, and more recently Lebanese and Sudanese, and from Syria. Tonight, those distinctions no longer apply. Tonight, we are all reborn Antiguans and Barbudans, each with a role to play, each with a contribution to make. Always, we should demonstrate to the world our national integrity, and in so doing, we must practice what we preach. My people, we are free this night, but freedom cannot exist without responsibility. The full burden of our freedom now rests squarely upon our shoulders. What we do with that freedom is our responsibility. We can blame no other. Part of that responsibility of freedom is to protect it. As a small developing country with little resources other than beaches, land, and people, we have to safeguard our freedom by ensuring that we never become dependent again. The ultimate safeguard of independence is productivity. This nation, born again tonight, must commit itself to work and to work hard. For if we fail to do so, the consequence of our failure will be dependence on a new master who will once again dictate our policies and direct our affairs. We must not have struggled so long with such fortitude to exchange one master for another. People of Antigua and Barbuda, I call on you to pledge yourselves to freedom. Rise up to the task of protecting our independence by creating an economical, self-reliant nation founded on the dignity of labor and the value of work. Let us go forth and be productive. Let us multiply the fruits of independence. Let us reap the rewards of labor. Let us make this a land of glory, a land where we can say with pride, we are Antiguans and Barbudans. And with these words, as a nation and as a people, we crossed over another milestone as citizens of Antigua and Barbuda. Moved from slaves to subjects. Now we had moved from subjects to being shapers of our own destiny. And so if the history of Antigua and Barbuda were to be written through musical lens, for sure it would reveal then that the period of the 1960s and the 80s was by far the most prolific in terms of output and impact. Nation building was at the epicenter of our national musical expression. For while one set of composers, writers, and musicians were providing patriotic hymns and songs, on the other side of the musical road, we find the country's top calypsonians producing songs that also mirrored and echoed the same sentiments about the challenges, the responsibilities, and the benefits of political independence and nation building. Calypso music finds its root in the French colonies, where the Creole word used was calypso. In essence, it is a musical style that allowed the enslaved Africans to deride, ridicule, and sing about their masters in veiled language. As the art form developed in the 19th and 20th century in the English-speaking Caribbean, it became known as calypso. But it maintained its core element of speaking truth to power by using very strong rhythm and always a refrain with a catch line. But just as important as the music, the performance of the calypso itself is critical. And calypsonians had to use names which reflect their alter ego. Hence, in Antigua, some of the most loved and well-respected calypsonians carried names such as the Mighty Swallow, Bold Face. In the Caribbean, bold face is equivalent to saying somebody's brazen, the person who tells you what they have to say to your face. King Obstinate, Progress, and the one that I've chosen to look at today, is King Short Shirt. While Calypsonians and their art were appreciated and received, this music in Antigua and Barbuda was deemed to be unfit for congregational use and in worship. It was too worldly, too provocative. And in Antigua and Barbuda, Calypsonians and their music were referred to as Benna music. I remember as a child growing up that calypsos could be played Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But on Sunday, the Lord's Day, you dare not play calypso music. That day was a holy day. Now, it did not mean that calypso and calypsonians were not celebrated. Rather, it was just that the attitude to this art form pointed to the dichotomy of the Caribbean persona. We were one way in church, but we became somebody else in our village, even though the village had the church. And so this all-important point of Benna, I want you to remember, because Benna, calypso, never made its way into the congregational worship, but the patriotic songs did. And so for that, credit must be given to the composers and the writers of these national songs. The criticism has often been made to the composers and writers of these national songs that they did not write in a style that reflected the Caribbean syncopation which we have often come to expect. That their music and their writing style was too Eurocentric. However, I countered that critique by drawing attention to two important points. First, the composers and writers of our national and patriotic hymns were largely trained under the British educational system, and as such could only write in a style which they were aiming to perfect, or at best imitate. Input determines output. Second, the team of composers and arrangers were mindful that they had to write in a musical style that would ensure that the national songs would be acceptable in all facets of the society. If the music was too worldly, like the Benna or the popular calypso, it would for sure be rejected by the Christian element of our society, and that would have meant failure. And so the patriotic and the national songs had to be simple, yet direct, so that they could be promoted in schools, played on the ear, and sung every day, including Sunday. And so over the period of time, they found their way into the pews of our churches. In that sense, they had achieved their goal. And so we're going to sing some of these songs now. I'll ask Ben to come forward. And as we sing these songs, I want you to take a listen as well. I don't know if Brian will have any success with, with Short Shirt. You want to go back to the first Short Shirt video, or just, no, let the past be the past. So forgetting those things that are behind, we press on. So we're going to do two activities. We're going to sing, but we're also going to listen. And so I want to draw your attention to some key words that serve to represent what the Jamaican British sociologist Stuart Hall describes as identification, a building block of identity and how it is formed. Hall proposes that identification be seen, and I quote, a construction, a process never completed, always in process, sustained, or abandoned, and that it is grounded in fantasy, in projection, in idealization. And so when we look at these national songs, there are some key words or phrases that you will see. God, freedom, peace, dignity, unity, endeavoring and achieving, land, nationhood, nation building, loyal devotion, hope, pride, pledge, heroes, unsung heroes, happiness. In subscribing to Hall's proposition, I want you to also listen to Short Shirt's calypsos. And as you listen, I'm going to challenge you to see what words you hear in these calypsos and to see how the words of the calypso and the words of our song actually integrate and work together. By so doing, we are seeking to see how through the singing of songs and through the hearing of songs, sound evokes the people's identity as it was being constructed, because this was a regular diet of our national patriotic songs and our calypsos. We start with the first, God bless Antigua, land is so dear to me. We sing just the first verse. God bless Antigua, land so dear to me, where first I felt a mother's hand and learned to bend the knee, where land and sea make beauty, let every man be free to proudly hold his head up high and walk with dignity. Bless all the people, enter all her doors, and may thy peace forever dwell within her shores, and may thy peace forever dwell within her shores. And a snippet of Short Shirt's calypso, In Spite of All.
At last, at long last, at last, out of chaos and strife, we found a hope we've never known. A glimpse, just a glimmer, just a gleam, but a flicker of light like I have never seen. The voices of my people tells me that they're reaching maturity. Their spirit shows that determination for a new society. Though plagued by injustice, misfortune and strain, and constant oppression, I force our change. Though we fail to get along, there's one thing we have in common: the oppression we bear will forge us as one. Yet in spite of all our hardship and misery, and poor economic condition, we must struggle on. The state of affairs at the moment indicate that a stand will have to be taken soon by we the people ourselves, for our future's sake. Can't allow all our time, efforts and talents to waste. If we open up our eyes, we could soar the skies and make this island a paradise. We can unite, speaking with divided voices. Rise, 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 rise. People, open up your eyes.
We go next to Antigua land, thy children love thee well. Same thing, just the first verse. Back to short shirt, not by might. So now you get to see him at least.
Treachery cease, when corruption cease, there is nothing to fear. For the tyranny will persist, dictate and oppress, harass and distress. No power, no power, no power in this world can halt the people's quest for freedom, freedom, freedom. I said freedom.
Good, and then we now go to From the Halls of Columbus. This was actually our independence hymn, so we'll sing just the first verses again for that. From the halls of Columbus, midst rags, dirt, and scorn, Jehovah has guided through dark days forlorn. To him be the glory, our country is free. Shout, and be happy for this jubilee. Shout hurrah, all Antigua rejoice. Shout hurrah, but peal it out with one voice. Let us enter the future with right dignity, and so pledge our effort to keep the land free. And back to short shirt, illusion.
They were free, and slavery has lost its sting. But they're not foolish, they can see you're lying deep within. Slavery has not left our doors, not yet, I'm sure. We have got to fight the battle some more. The time has come for every man in the Caribbean. Forge one common destiny, designed to make our people free. We have got to stand up for the rights, to lead the lives we choose, to change and answer to refuse. If you think the battle is done, my brother, and you are riding an illusion, an illusion. You talk of progress, love and justice, peace and unity, all illusion. We have no hold on these our native islands. Our hands are tied, we don't control our actions. From the way forward together in a social endeavor, our goal, social control. We slave no more, we slave no more. Only then we'll slave no more. We'll beg no more, we'll stoop no more. Only then we'll.
And in the interest of time, let's just go to the last hymn. We sing the praise of Nelson and of heroes of England, and then Short Shirt's Pledge, and then I'll give my closing comments. So the last song there, it's on page Unsung Heroes, yeah. Yeah.
Praise of Nelson and of heroes of England. In school we're taught the lesson of a mighty distant land. But what of our own heroes, of our own time and place? You are the unsung heroes, the Zion of our race.
And then pledge.
Hundreds of years of slavery and colonialist domination, we are now politically free in an independent nation. The dreams of our forefathers have finally come true, and the battle that they have fought are now benefiting me and you. Corruption will cease, nepotism decrease throughout the whole nation. Our country then will be not just a society, but a just society. Let this be our pledge.
Let me close. The legacy of colonialism is of such that long after freedom has been achieved, full emancipation is still to be realized. Yet the march towards emancipation is a march that is worth every ounce of effort. Why? Because it is a journey towards ensuring that the world God imagines is in fact lived. The national songs of Antigua and Barbuda and the prophetic voice of its Calypsonians have and continue to aid its citizens to live into such a world. Yet to intentionally pursue the pathway of life that leads into the world that God imagines, the case study of the songs of Antigua and Barbuda reveal 3 points of action that I submit to us as being necessary as we commence the next century of the hymn society. First, as we sing the world God imagines, let us be determined to confront and exorcise the diabolic image of self that was imposed by those acting on behalf of the empire. And in the name of God, to situate others in a world that they imagined, while also claiming falsely that it was the world also that God imagines. Might we then self-examine and ensure that in our ministry as a society, we are always careful to ensure that we do not adopt the empire posture of knowing what is best for others without asking or listening, or worse yet, inadvertently become satellites of a visible or invisible empire. The citizens of Antigua and Barbuda continue to use these songs to protest and reject the false image imposed by those who in the past and who still today seek to do so. Second, as we sing the world God imagines, might we open ourselves to being surprised by how God works in mysterious and mischievous ways to initiate the reimagining and the reimaging of all of God's precious creation, not always from within and among those who are readily identified as members of the household of faith. For as Holy Scripture bears witness repeatedly, God tends to operate and begin a work of renewal, not always from the center of power, but from the margins. National songs continue to be written, and the prophetic voice of the calypsos resonate in the face of acts of injustice and abuse of those in power and authority, even when sometimes the collective voice of the faithful has been muted or compromised. Third, as we sing the world God imagines, might we ready ourselves to step into the beyond that which is recognizable, that which is predictable, that which is manageable. New horizons will appear only when we do not allow ourselves to be anchored in the shallow waters of familiarity. Before and even after its independence in 1981, grounded in their sense of a defined and a strong national identity, generations of Antiguans and Barbudans have and continue to serve God and nation with a consciousness that they embody and reflect the ideals that have been captured and expressed in song. May these songs then inspire us all to write, compose, lead, and sing the world that God imagines. And I hope that as Christians, we dare not doubt for one moment that the world God imagines is non-existent. If our Christian theology teaches us that God does not exist, but that God is, then it ought to lead us to also conclude that the world God imagines is. And that is worth repeating. The world God imagines is. So then, we must sing and keep singing about this world that God imagines, because it is through our singing together of such a world that that which God imagines becomes the world in which we all share. When we sing the world God imagines, we are singing of a world that is a home for all, because all have been welcomed and all belong. And in this world, all means all. Thank you.